Welcome to Roast Magazine's Interview with an Author. I'm Connie Blumhardt, founder and publisher of Roast Magazine. Roast Magazine is a bi-monthly trade journal that covers where coffee's grown, how it's roasted, and how it's brewed, all from a technical standpoint. We also publish daily coffee news, a news site covering all things coffee. The point of this interview is to showcase the amazing writers that contribute to Roast Magazine and the importance of the topics we feature in the magazine. I'm pleased to welcome Ian Fretheim, author of A New Tool for the Cupping Kit, which will appear in the March-April issue of Roast Magazine. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Connie.
Tell me about yourself.
Well, what can I say? I am the director of sensory analysis here at Cafe Imports. Less professionally, I was married. I just was married a year and a half ago. Thank you so much. I'm a Zen priest. So, for marrying and burying, I'm potentially your guy.
All right, I'll keep it in mind.
I've never buried, but I have married before. So
Cool.
There you are. What else? I like to build retaining walls and do landscaping and get out in the sun. And as a lifelong Minnesotan, we really treasure our 3 days of sun that we get.
Right. How long have you worked at Cafe Imports?
I am just running up on my 12-year anniversary.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And how did you get into coffee?
I got into coffee via nerding, just because my now good friend Andrew Copland opened up his first cafe, essentially right up the street from me. And so I just started going and drinking a lot of espresso and became friends with him. And that's really where I got into, knowing about coffee and learning about coffee. And like I said, becoming a nerd about coffee. And then it was much later where the job opening came here and I applied. It was just, spit bucket cleaner, entry level, assistant in the sample room, cleaning cups, wiping up counters, and learning to taste coffee.
That's amazing considering what you do now.
Yeah, it's very different, and a really remarkable chain of events. When it came time for when I was first offered this position, it was fairly early on. But we see a lot of volume, and I had done a lot of, even for that short amount of time, had done a fair amount of travel and tasting. But at that time, I really got taken under the wings of Andrew and Jason, and they really helped me out just tasting coffee and kind of growing the reference library and the perspective and all that. That's
amazing. And they're both amazing teachers, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely.
And I have some very fun stories to share, but I won't do that today.
Okay. Maybe after the call.
Right. So Andrew and I'm not sure what year Cafe Import started, but we started in coffee about the same time. So we've known each other for a really long time. All right, let's talk about the article that you published in the March-April issue. I'm going to read the whole title, and it's long. A new tool for the cupping kit. The Cafe Imports Coffee Rose offers a new model for sensory evaluation. Tell us about the article.
Well, the article. So the article is what we're referring to as a methods release, right? So I think this is the first thing that's really important. We're not actually releasing this tool that we're calling the Coffee Rose. We're not releasing that out into the world right now as a product that anyone can just pick up and use. But it's a project that we've been working on for a long time, and we have transitioned to using internally. And so we wanted to tell people, like, this is something that we've been working on. This is now something that we're using, and this is our thinking that has gone into it. And this is a little window into the process back here. We haven't, for me personally, haven't had any kind of big release since maybe the water activity paper. And Well, we've been hard at work ever since then, but kind of wanted to open up a conversation a bit. And so the article is really aimed at that, opening up a conversation or continuing one. And yeah, just letting people see kind of how we're looking at things, how we're approaching some issues that have been identified within cupping and increasing interest throughout the industry in sensory science, and kind of the tack that we're taking to find a way together for those two things.
Can you tell us how the cupping tool works?
Yeah, I can. So the cupping tool is it's a flavor wheel, very familiar to, I think, everyone in specialty coffee. And it takes, it looks at every bit on that flavor wheel as a button, and every button has a value attached to it. And so when you press something on that wheel, that value gets entered into a list essentially behind the scenes. So a user is just navigating around the cupping table and around the wheel, entering items and describing the coffees that they're tasting. And behind the scenes, then the computer is looking at the profile that the user's generating and referencing standards that have been, that exist in advance of the cupping. Standard really specifically meaning something like malic acid is more interesting to us than citric acid, right? So citric acid has a value and malic acid has a value, and there's a little bit of a higher value associated with malic acid. Or apricot has a little bit higher value than lemon. This is very technically, very specifically what we mean when we talk about having a standard and the transparency that comes with that. So if you submit a coffee to me, you can see all this and know that if my coffee tastes like apricot, that's going to be better than if it tastes like lemon, and that's going to be better than if it tastes like sage or thyme. So that kind of transparency going in, when you hand me that coffee, instead of saying, I hope you like this, you would say, I hope it's good. And good doesn't mean that Ian's in a good mood and is liking the coffee. Good means that the coffee is meeting metrics that we are, happy to share with you in advance of you ever handing the coffee to us.
So help me understand. This is how I kind of understood it. So the new tool will sort of take out attributes that you personally might find better than another attribute. A little bit, right?
What do you mean by takeout?
Well, it might give a different scoring, right? Like you said, if you're in a good mood,
Yep.
like obviously cupping is a really, it can be a highly personal experience.
Yep.
And I think that the industry, not just cafe imports, I think you're a little bit ahead of other people, but I've heard more people talking about trying to let's see, give different apply attributes more evenly. Yep. Based on, rather than personal preference.
Yes. So most cupping forms, if someone gives you a cupping form and they say, and you say, how do I use it? And they say, well, we want you to look at this attribute and tell us the quality of the attribute, right? That makes sense. We're specialty coffee. We're interested in quality. But the weird thing is, the catch here, almost a paradox, is if you have a cupping form in front of you and the request on that cupping form is for the user to assess the quality of an attribute. So the quality of the flavor, the quality of the acidity, etc. What's actually happening is you're just giving your preference. Unless there is somewhere in the world or in your office or in your cupping lab, a document that says malic acid is higher quality than citric acid, what's going on is the quality question is really just a preference question. It's a liking question. And so on the cupping, on the coffee roast, of course, that preference component is not available to the assessor. And for sure, there's, I mean, like you said, it's a very personal thing when you're tasting coffee. But I would say that there's a difference between the output that I want when I'm tasting coffee and the output that I want when I'm assessing coffee. So if my perspective, if my point is that I'm assessing your coffee and telling you we're going to buy this or not buy this, or we're going to buy this for X amount of dollars or not buy it for X amount of dollars, we want that to be about the coffee and not about me.
Right.
And one of the ways that we make it not about me is by not having it be a question of my preference, or my preference on Tuesday or my preference on Thursday, which seems like, oh, well, you know, I'm a professional cupper. Maybe it's not a big deal, but it really is a bigger deal for people than what they think they are. There's a thing that we spent a lot of time with, and we still look at a lot, called sensory errors. They're common sensory errors. It's a foundational thing in sensory science, and the sensory errors are human errors. They're not like you're a bad person. They're not like you're a bad cupper. They are, guess what? You're a human creature. And as a human creature, you are susceptible to these common sensory errors. Some are physiological, some are psychological. And preference gets baked in there and has a larger impact than most people think, or than most people perceive. Right.
Agreed. And I think, you know, cupping 20 years ago is totally different than it is today. So I think it makes a lot of sense that we're reevaluating the way that we cup, the way we assess value and quality based on coffee's attributes. And I'm being really careful when I'm saying these things, because I know there's a lot going on right now in this arena. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm stating things correctly. What do you think? What did you learn that didn't make it into the article?
You know, I'll preface by saying you and your team were very generous with the amount of space that you gave me in the article. I appreciate that. But we learned, I mean, it was such a long project. I learned so much working on this project, and it was challenging to distill everything into what the article turned out to be. Also very thankful for the editing support, and like really the good questions, helping me to focus and organize my thinking and presentation. And what did we learn? Well, I mentioned already the sensory errors. That relates back to really a whole project and paper in and of itself with regard to protocol in the cupping room, right? That's this whole thing that's underpinning the direction that we went with the coffee rose. You can think about that in terms of like the coffee rose is really the well, this is silly, but it's the flower. It's the final expression of this whole thing that in sensory science you would call preparation and presentation. How are you preparing your tests? How are you preparing your samples? How are you presenting them? All of that is very wildly important with regard to generating better sensory output. So that's one really big important thing that just didn't have space in the article as we were really trying to talk about the rose itself. I think another thing that was really important and a little bit more personal was my own arc with regard to understanding sensory science, and like coming from this, my initial place was like this hard line. We need to get rid of subjectivity, and we need to get rid of preference entirely, and we need to get rid of qualifying statements and just go numbers and quantification and measurement. And I'm not, that's not where I'm at anymore. I think, you know, one way to look at specialty coffee cupping as we know it today, as we've known it for a while, and really in all of its forms, it is really very much about experience, and it's about conveying experience. I taste a coffee, you taste a coffee. We want to talk about that, or maybe just you taste a coffee and you want me to understand what you've tasted. So it's experience, and we're trying to convey experience or share experience. The sensory science thing is about analysis. So we have experience and then we have analysis. And on the analysis side, we're dissecting things. We're taking a coffee and we're not talking about flavor. We're talking about fruitiness. We're talking about herbalness, floralness, sugar browning. We're talking about acidity, and not the goodness of the acidity, but the type of acids, the amount of acids. We're talking about sweetness, saltiness, bitterness. From the sensory science side, we're taking this really wonderful thing that we have experience with and have experiences of and feel compelled to share with one another. And we're like killing it. We're dissecting it. We're breaking it apart and putting it under a microscope. And we're doing that, for the sake of accuracy and for the sake of, finding the most interesting coffees, that kind of thing. But we have to be careful there, I think, because if you think back to the first La Esmeralda Geisha competition coffee, that coffee that kind of like, maybe it didn't really change everything for specialty coffee, but it's a big flag.
I think it changed a lot.
I think you're right. I think it did.
And I can still remember the first time I tasted it on a cupping table. I was like, what was that? Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh, well,
lose your train.
It's a super interesting, that whole thing is really interesting. And we could ask questions from the sensory science side. If that cupping and general specialty cupping is preference-based, given the experience that was reported, why did that coffee only get 96 points, right? The other question would be, where in the world are you going to find 4 more points? What coffee is going to have 4 more points? What cupping table is going to have 4 more points on it, apart from something that was described in that way? Now, if you're doing sensory science and it's all about intensity, you could say, oh, well, it was really fruity, it was really floral, it was really acidic, but maybe the mouthfeel wasn't very heavy. And so maybe there's 2 points right there, right? So from a measurement side, maybe you could get out of giving 100 points to that coffee, but from a preference side, some of the people coming out of there described it as an otherworldly beautiful coffee. I think that's a great description, but that's not a 96-point description. That's 100 points. That's just, that's an issue with sensory and cupping and preference. Now, in sensory science, there are not otherworldly beautiful coffees. And I think that's an issue, right? I think on the cupping table in a sensory science lab, there's coffees with more acidity and less acidity. There's coffees with malic acid and citric acid. There's coffees with limonene or citric acid, and maybe coffees with both, but that's all that they are. They're just coffee solutions. They're just water solutions with coffee constituents.
Okay.
And that's a different thing. That's a very different thing. So that's analysis. And I think part of my big arc, and something that I didn't really get into in the article, is I think that for many of us, I think synthesis is kind of where we probably want to end up. So there's some issues on the pure experience side. And I think there's some issues on the pure analysis side. And I think as a goal or as a target, maybe we can aim for landing in something of a synthesis where the analysis of sensory science is kind of reining in some of the shortcomings and putting a floor on some of the biases, some of the noise generated from a pure experiential type of cupping. But hopefully we still get to have experience hopefully we still get to have experiential experiences
Mhm.
with coffee on the cupping table, and hopefully those get to, like, you know, give flavor to the analysis of sensory science. Like, we want to know, okay, yeah, this has more acidity than this, but we also do want to know, this acidity was juicy, this acidity was tangy, right? How do you quantify juicy and tangy? I don't know if you do.
Right.
You can quantify more and less acidity, right? You can do that with titration, or you can do that, humans can do that fairly well with a decent amount of accuracy. Maybe not so much juicy, maybe not so much tangy, tart, etc. But we want to talk about that. And just because it's a little bit tougher to quantify doesn't mean that we're not experiencing that. And it doesn't mean that if you tell me, I just tasted this Kenya and it was really juicy, that tells me something, right? That's interesting to me. I want to know more about that. I want to, suddenly now you've opened the door and extended this bridge, and I'm like, all right, well, let's talk about that Kenya. And, you know, in the best case scenario, let's share that Kenya. Let's sit down and let's taste it together and drink it. And let's expand communication, you know, with some accuracy. Okay, it was juicy. Was it just citric acid? Was it a little bit phosphoric? Was it one of these bigger, rounder current fruit bomb Kenyas?
Yeah. There's, I feel like that the coffee rose really is asking a lot of the questions, or addressing a lot of the questions that the industry seems to be looking at in terms of cupping and evaluation of coffee. Will you release the coffee rose for people to use?
Yeah, you know, right now there's that demo is out there, and we're actually working on a kind of, call it like a demo plus for Expo.
Oh, great.
So I think that's going to be really cool. Once we kind of cross that line, then me and the development crew are going to get back together and let the dust settle and see where we're at, and hopefully then pivot and really start working on making a tool that's robust enough and ready for other people to use. Right. We're still working on it. We're still breaking things and really trying to make it better. It's pretty neat that we've got a crew in Berlin and another in Melbourne, because they get to use it on different time zones and with very different background experiences, and we get a lot of good feedback and a lot of good questions. And yeah, so we want to make it as good as we can. And then we have this other conversation about, like, if we release it, if we build it into a thing for others to use, how can we do that, one, in a way that's not presumptuous, right? Because here's this flavor wheel. You'll look at it, you'll see it's not the SCA flavor wheel. It's not the old one. It's not the new one. It's really just a lexicon of coffee terminology that we use and that we hear. And there's values tied to all of that language. So
I think that's what is most exciting for me to look at, and just opening up how we evaluate coffee it's fascinating, and I think it's time, right? Obviously, you guys have been working on this for 2 years. SCA is working on something, so it'll be really interesting, and I look forward to hoping to see it in the wild.
Well, I can't wait. And yeah, like I say, at SCA, you'll have a chance to see at least the demo plus version, and you can go on now and check out the demo. The demo this is important. The demo is different from the version that we're using internally. Internally, the wheel that we use, we don't see the score as the cupping is going. We're only interacting with the descriptors and the language. So it is designed purely as what's called a kata check all that apply form. So
Mhm.
I've got the wheel and I'm just checking the things that I'm tasting. And that's it. And then
Okay.
you finish the table and you press submit and you no longer have access to say anything else about the coffee. And it tells you, one, what you said, and two, how what you said relates to the standards that we have written, behind the wheel. The
All right.
demo, we flipped it and we kind of like put that scoring engine right on the front so that as you press a button, you see the score change. So you start at 80.
Okay.
Our wheel, the coffee rose is built around this idea of a 80-point coffee, specialty coffee. And then we have these intensity indicators reference with our, we have a reference coffee on every cupping table. And it's just a very simple 80-point coffee. The whole idea of the rose is to determine if something that you're tasting is more than the reference. So you taste a coffee and you say, oh, hey, blackberry. Okay. Is it a little bit more blackberry than the reference? Is it a lot more blackberry than the reference? Is it wildly more blackberry than the reference? That's the intensity component of how that works. So when you open the demo, it starts at 80, and when you press, fruit, dried blackberry, you'll see the number goes, okay, plus 1.5, and you're at 81 and a half. If you press fruit and you just say, oh, it's this coffee is a little fruity, it'll go, like maybe it'll go plus 5, or I'm sorry,
That's amazing.
plus 0.5,
0.5.
plus half a point. So we set the demo up so that you can kind of see in real time how we're talking about coffees.
Yeah.
It's not to say that's how you should think about a coffee.
Right.
It's just now you know exactly how we got to our score. We gave coffee 88 points, and we said these words, and this is the value that we've assigned to each of these words.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing the demo at SCA. I look forward to seeing you at SCA. And thank you so much for contributing to Roast Magazine.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking the time to do this this conversation and giving me space in your magazine. It was very nice.
Well, the pleasure is all ours.
Ready. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you.